Systems engaged. Stand by to receive transmission. Coming to you from a recording studio somewhere in the multiverse. This is Robots from Tomorrow. This show about comics is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or your podcatcher of choice. If you like what we do here, subscribing, liking, rating, and reviewing the show helps more of your fellow humans find out about us and is greatly appreciated. For more information about the show and our archive of over 800 episodes, go to robotsfromtomorrow.net. Now, here is your host, Greg.
Hello, and welcome back to Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg. Thank you for joining us. Today's guest is making his 6th appearance on the show. In previous episodes, we've talked about various aspects of his career in comics, from intern to editor at such places as Heavy Metal, Valiant, Humanoids, and of course, DC Comics. But today, he's here as the writer of that company's Milestone Universe, The Shadow Cabinet, a 4-issue limited series bringing him back to Milestone Comics, where his professional journey began. I am, of course, talking about Joseph Illidge, who I am delighted to have back on the show once again. Joe, it has been too long. How are you doing?
Doing all right, Greg. Yeah, you're right. It's been forever, so it's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
I think you're the most returned non-multiversity guest in our image. Yeah. It's 4 in studio, quote unquote. One check-in at, I want to say like a New York Comic-Con, you were tabling with somebody whose name escapes. Like I can literally see
Simmons?
It. Yes. Yeah, bang.
I was tabling with Alex Simmons, right? Because I did an introduction for a trade paperback he did based off of his character Blackjack.
Yeah. That's why you get paid the big bucks. The steel trap up there.
It still works now and again.
Yeah. Okay, so the challenge I've set for myself today is to keep things focused on the Shadow Cabinet. So give our listeners your pitch for the mini to kick things off.
The Shadow Cabinet is about a 17-year-old superhero named Rocket. She is now the only superhero that's out there fighting the fight for various reasons in the wake of an invasion of that world by Superman's enemy, Brainiac. 6 months have passed, and the world has changed because of this invasion from an artificial alien intelligence. And there is a big threat on the horizon, and because of that, a secret society of superheroes whose history goes back decades, called the Shadow Cabinet, steps out of the shadows to recruit Rocket into their side.
This is, of course, not a novel. You have, dare I say, a Shadow Cabinet of your own working with you on this one.
Okay, so I'm the writer. We have 2 artists. Darryl Banks is a veteran of comics for over 30 years. He's probably most known for co-creating the Green Lantern, known as Kyle Rayner, in the mid-90s. And the co-artist is Artigun Ilhan. Artigun is a graduate from a program called the Milestone Initiative, which was put together by Milestone, DC Comics, Warner Brothers, and Ally Bank. And it was this program that recruited 24 people out of hundreds of submissions and put them through a process to teach them how to make better comics. And then they've gone off and done different things, whether in the DC universe and in other universes. So those are the 2 different generations of artists. The colorist is Chris Sotomayor. Chris and I go back to the original Milestone, which started publishing in 1993. The lettering studio is Ann World Design. And we have covers drawn by Dennis Cowan, who is a legend in comics. He's the first founder of Milestone, was his idea originally, and he started recruiting people to help him make it a reality. And we have covers by Nicholas Draper Ivy, who is an amazing artist. He was the illustrator of Static Season 1 for the Milestone relaunch, and he was both the illustrator and writer of the sequel, which was called Static Shadows of Dakota. And then for the first issue, we also have a cover by Sean Gordon Murphy, well known for Batman White Knight and the recent revamp of Zorro. So really just like a great creative team. And with that all is editor Marquis Draper.
I'm glad you mentioned Marquis. I have a question about him in a second. Okay. I do want to say the cover for issue 1 Oh man, it's Dennis.
Which one?
Sorry, yeah, that's true. The one that was on the PDF that I was sent
Yes.
is of course the
Yes.
Dennis Cowan one.
Yes.
Oh, so good, and I gotta say, having the Milestone logo and the old school DC logo up at the top,
It's perfect.
that's the way it's supposed
And
to look.
you know, it's funny. I'm not one of those people that took issue with DC's logo changing over the decades.
Yeah.
But there is something special about seeing that one back, because that's the one, when you think DC Comics in your head, the majority of people will see that one. I believe
Mhm.
it was designed by Milton Glaser,
Mhm.
and it is a work of genius. And yes, seeing that back with the Milestone one, which goes back to the 1990s,
Mhm.
when both publishers put together the first run of Milestone Comics, it's very poetically cyclical.
Yeah, it's so good. How did you get back into the fold?
It really started with me reaching out to Reginald Hudlin and Dennis Cowan, who are Milestone Media's producers and both friends of mine. And I've learned
Mhm.
a lot from them as human beings, and saying, hey, would you be interested in hearing a pitch for X?
Mhm.
Right. And they said, sure, send us something. And that was the beginning of a journey, because I think any writer will tell you this. The first thing you pitch, that first version is rarely the one that
Mhm.
goes to print.
Mhm.
Rarely. Reggie and Dennis and I had discussions for a while. Then DC Comics came in. So that was editor Marquis Draper and executive editor Chris Conroy. And so then I started having conversations with DC. And then we all got together on one Zoom call and talked about what did this have to be in terms of the larger landscape of Milestone's relaunch. What did this story have to signify?
Mhm.
And so after that conversation, I believe it was 2 weeks later, I came back with a 21-page outline for what would become Shadow Cabinet.
Mhm.
And with very few changes, they signed off on it. But that was informed by a lot of conversation. This has really been in the works for over a year,
Mhm. Mhm. Okay.
right? Like from the very beginning to now, it may even be, yeah, I would say a year. And that's the thing. These things take time.
Mhm.
It's not drop water, here comes a comic book. Like the whole process takes a lot of time. But once we all got in the same virtual room and zeroed in on what this had to signify, that was the final key that I needed to be able to say, okay, I have an idea. I think this is it. And just laid it out, right, in a really long outline. I don't have this ability to immediately distill something of grand scale down to 3 pages.
Mhm.
So I just wrote the thing and I just sent it. And that was the beginning. And once that happens, then you start building the team who are going to be the collaborators to tell the story, right? And so once the team was built, then it was really off to the races.
Mhm. It's such a fascinating thing of your journey with Milestone, starting off there, and obviously your relationships with people, including people you're working with now. They say you can't go home again, but in a way you have. What has it been like coming back into that world where you have these relationships, but now you're in a new role, right?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's amazing, right? Like how many people get to do that?
Not many.
You know, as you've stated, I've spent the majority of my career as an editor,
Mhm.
and I am now spending the majority of my career as a writer. So to have what I would consider the first big project of myself as an author happen with Milestone is perfect,
Yeah.
because Milestone is the company where I started my career, right? I
Mhm.
started as an intern, then I went into business, and then it was Dwayne McDuffie, God rest his soul. Dwayne McDuffie showed me what being an editor was and the great responsibility of it. And that's when I said, that's what I want to do.
Mhm.
But I've been in a business for 31 years, and I want to be on the front lines with the writers now. And there are things I want to discuss with the world through the comic books and with the audience. And I have the capability to do it. And so being able to do it at Milestone is just really great. For me, there is a certain level of import in which I am continuing the legacy that was created by the men who brought me into comics: Dwayne McDuffie, Derek T. Dingle, Michael Davis, Dennis Cowan, and Christopher Priest. With Dwayne gone, and Dwayne being one of my main story mentors, along with Denny O'Neil when I was a Batman editor, I feel personally profoundly good that I can continue the dream that Dwayne believed in. And I really love this relationship with the Milestone fans, because there's Milestone fans from the 90s comics, there's Milestone fans because of the Static Shock cartoon,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and there's Milestone fans from the relaunch. So that's 3 different communities, in addition to totally new readers. Because in a very basic way, comic books are soap operatic. And one thing about soap operas is you should be able to dive into any episode and somehow find your footing, and you're off to the races. So it was important to create a story that rewarded the faith of the Milestone fans who have been waiting a year and a half for something new. And it was really tough seeing them on social media and not being able to say, something's coming, we see you. But to reward their faith and to create a story of scale that focuses on 2 characters on a journey. And I feel like anyone will be able to read these and identify with those characters in some way, shape, or form. So I'm having the time of my life. You know, we're talking now, Shadow Cabinet 1 will be out soon. I've already written off 4 issues. Now is the art and the editing and things like that. So I'm still very much part of that journey, but it's really going to be great for this journey to begin with the fans, with the audience, with new readers, and for us to have conversations.
Having read the first issue, if your goal was reader friendly first issue, mission accomplished. So
thank you.
I
That
just
was
wanna
the
make sure.
goal, because listen, I appreciate that sincerely, because I wrote the first issue before we all decided to do the recap page.
Mhm.
And the recap page is amazing. Hats off to Reginald Hudlin, Dennis Cowan, Marquis Draper, and the design team at DC Comics.
Yeah.
Because when I posted the recap page on social media, everyone just loved it. But I did write Shadow Cabinet 1 so that you could treat it like a James Bond film. Like, there's a cold open. It's 3 pages. It starts off very idyllic. I like those stories where it's like, this story that could go very badly for a lot of people. The first scene you see is this picture perfect day.
Yeah.
Then everything starts changing at 100 miles per hour. I love that. So starting it with a cold open and getting down to the get down when you meet the first character of importance in this drama, that's cool. That's fun. That's what I like reading and seeing in other stories. So I really enjoyed being able to do that.
Let's talk about working with some collaborators. Are you a full script kind of writer? Are you let's hash it out and then go Marvel style? Where do you
Yeah.
fall on that?
It's a good question. I'm a full script guy
Mm.
because it's so part of what the Marvel style involves is when the art gets back, then they write the dialogue, because there are things they see in the art that activate different neurons in their heads.
Mhm.
For me as a writer, I need to have crystalline clarity of the emotional states and the ebb and flow of the story, of the character's emotions, the page turns.
Mhm.
I need to know that internally. But now in comics, and I don't think it was this way when I started in comics, but you know, the lettering script is part of the conventional process where even if you write a full script, once you get the art, you may then still do some tweaks,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I like writing full script. It gives me the understanding of the characters, and narrative sets tone, right?
Mhm.
And I would like to think it helps the artists too, to see where the characters are at by their internal dialogue or their external dialogue or their conversations with one another. It allows the artist to help direct the actors. And I know that definitely happened with Darryl and Artigun. We've had conversations. There's a conversation that happens in Shadow Cabinet between two characters, like in the middle of the story. And I remember Darryl saying to me how that conversation really clicked for him and really helped him stage the scene. Because the reality is, in comics, artists make writers look better. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. It's been a really good process working with Darryl and Artigun, and what they do to a page. It just takes what I had in my mind and it takes it to a whole other level. And it's funny because as a writer, you may have this vision of how you saw the page, and then you get something totally different. But as opposed to getting something totally different and being opposed to it, I really try to embrace it and say, okay. And one of the things that I've learned is, I knew Darryl Banks was a good storyteller. Darryl Banks is a brilliant storyteller. And I have learned things working with him. And Artigun knows how to create a focal point on every page and then take the reader's eye through the page. So they both have storytelling chops. And so working with them has made me a better writer. And it's just fun. It's fun to work with talented, cool people. And it's a lot of work, of course.
Yeah.
Everything is work. Writing is work. And obviously art, it's all work. But it's also fun. And I feel like sometimes we may forget to say that enough, that it is fun.
Yeah. The book looks great. It's well put together. And of course, part of that has to go to Marquis Draper. I have to ask this, and I hope this doesn't come off as cheeky or whatever, but I'm curious what it was like working with him, because in my head, he's almost like the new you in a way. Like,
oh, that's interesting. Right.
He's
right.
You know, because you're not only like, hey, I'm a writer now and I'm working with an editor, but you're working on a big 2 book, which brings its own things to it. And now
Right.
you're working with a young editor. It sounds like it was a great experience.
Was that present in my mind? That kind of
Yeah.
echo?
Yeah.
I would say yes.
I mean,
Which, first of all, which I think
Which
is
is
great,
fine.
right?
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the dream of Milestone is permanence, right? There shouldn't be a world without Milestone Comics, okay? And because of Milestone Comics, we got Static Shock. And because of the Static Shock cartoon, so many young people who had not seen themselves as the hero did. Static Shock changed things. You don't have a Spider-Verse without Static Shock. You don't have some of the most influential people in animation now without Static Shock. There should always be a milestone, right? And because of that, it's generational. Working with the new generation of Milestone editorial, which is Marquis Draper and Chris Conroy, is a great experience. Marquis has very sharp instincts when it comes to how story is communicated on the page, what's there and what's missing. And he's really communicative. You know, for me, as someone who has been an editor for most of their career, I'm actually relieved to be the writer and to have an editor as my guide. And he has been a really good guide to work with. And so we've had a lot of fun. I'm hoping that we're going to have some more fun in the future. I've said that to him, and let's see if we can manifest that into the world and make that. And it's also been cool coming back to DC Comics. It was so wild when I had to sign up and become part of DC's digital freelancer system. And a woman, her name is Jane Feister. I don't remember her title. Jane, if you hear this, forgive me. She literally wrote at the end of the email, "Welcome back to DC Comics."
Wow.
And I was just like, huh. Right? I was like, wow, yeah. How freaking awesome is that? And so working with him has been cool. Chris Conroy is, I mean, one of the most brilliant editorial supervisors I've come across in some time. It's no wonder that he's basically spearheading the new Vertigo. And he loves the Milestone characters. He went public and said that on a series of Blue Sky posts, and you know that he loves them. And Marquis loves them. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about what it's like working with Reginald Hudlin. Obviously, a legend in film. There are a number of things that I've learned working with him, talking with him, truly a visionary. Working with Dennis Cowan, one of my first mentors. And it's also interesting, Dennis and I working together now, both having gone through our journeys. And now we're both wiser, we're both sharper, right?
Yeah.
And Shadow Cabinet is a story about a rebirth of a world of heroes. But at the core of it is about two characters. It's about Rocket, a 17-year-old girl trying to be the only superhero out there, and what kind of toll that's taking on her.
Mm-hmm.
And she has a journey. And then there's a woman named Angela Alva. Now, if you've read Milestone Comics, the last name Alva has particular meaning to you.
Yeah.
But if you haven't, Angela Alva is a biracial woman in her 60s, and she hits the ground running when you meet her in this book.
Yeah.
And she has a very particular purpose. She has a very particular want. And as this story goes forward, you're going to find out what that is. And what the hope is that at a certain point, you will start to reevaluate your opinion of her.
Mm-hmm.
Because the very first time we meet her, she does something, and it will give you an opinion of her. And as you keep going, that opinion is subject to change, right? And so that's part of the fun. And it's fun to tell this story about a young woman on a journey and an older woman on a journey, and how those two things parallel but dovetail, and how that reawakens a group of heroes who were profoundly affected by the invasion of Brainiac. And let's think about that. There's two things about that. Number one is Brainiac is a villain from the Superman universe, but if you don't know that, he's basically an alien artificial intelligence. Think about that. Like an alien artificial intelligence comes to invade our world. Just project that out and think about what that means. And Brainiac fails, but there's the residue of it that has impacted people. So we come to the world 6 months after the heroes beat back Brainiac. But the second thing is, and this is something that a lot of us know in comics, it's these stories that don't matter. Events that happen and then they're done, and it doesn't matter. It didn't have any impact. And so in crafting Shadow Cabinet, it was important that all the Milestone books mattered. And it's important that Shadow Cabinet matters. You know, and I've made the analogy of comparing it to Avengers Endgame, in the sense that Avengers Endgame was a culmination of a number of micro stories. And it resolved certain characters' lives and arcs, and then it opened doors to new things, right? And there was a beauty about that. There was a symmetry of that. So Shadow Cabinet is that, right? What it also is, I hope, is a story that 5 years later, someone could pick it up and it's new and say, you know what? That was a fun romp. The event that matters. That's what all of us are creating with this story. Hopefully history will decide that it is that.
In these stories of big things happening, if you don't connect with the characters, then it doesn't mean anything. You write a pretty good Rocket. I gotta go ahead and say that. I know she's a favorite character of yours. When you go to write Rocket, how do you dial into this woman and speak for her?
That's a great question. So first thing is, Rocket is my favorite Milestone character. And if I thought about my 10 favorite superhero characters in comics, Rocket would probably be there. So the first thing is that even though this is a 21st century version of the Milestone universe, with any character, with any intellectual property, there are the core qualities that remain. So Superman through the decades has core qualities. Wonder Woman through the decades has core qualities. So there are core qualities that Rocket has. And I feel that they were encapsulated in something that an old colleague of mine named Jason Medley said, or he wrote it down and I read it. It was 10 words about Rocket. He said, the soul of a poet, the heart of a warrior. And that's her. And the original version is this young girl who wants to be a writer. Her idol is Toni Morrison. She wants to be a writer. And in this new version, I don't think it's crystallized for her yet that she wants to be a writer, but she expresses herself through writings. And so, what was important for me to think about is young Black women, a 17-year-old Black girl in America. That's tough. And if you are the only superhero out there, that's tough. And what occurred to me is that she is disconnected from family or friends. She has walked away from her old life and she's out there fighting the fight every day. And she's 17 years old, so she could actually fight the fight for 24 hours straight. When I was thinking about the story, I felt there had to be a human entryway. And so I wanted that to be Rocket writing a letter to her mother, whom she hasn't seen in 6 months, right? I thought that was very important to key into Rocket's humanity, to use the letter to show how she is both disconnected from and connected to her mother, and to embody those core qualities of the soul of a poet, the heart of a warrior.
It was really fun to re-engage with her and have her be the entry point to this story in a way
Thank
that
you.
like Icon was one of my favorite Milestone series, and obviously she's not the title character, but she's the point of view character, and so
Right.
it also is a nice little parallel to that. She's sort of our point of view character for this, and she's the one that has so much stuff going on, and she has such a handle on things, and yet not, because nobody does at that age, and I really dug that. And there's a bunch of other stuff going on, and going on in the issue, but that was.
And just to give a quick summary of Rocket for people who are new to her, Rocket's a young Black girl that discovers there is a superhuman alien on Earth who's been living as a Black man and has disconnected himself from society. Rocket, whose real name is Raquel Irvin, convinces that person to become a superhero. And she says, and I'm going to be your sidekick and we're going to change the world. And when Shadow Cabinet starts, you find out that the Icon experiment failed.
Yeah.
And so she can't be the sidekick anymore. She has to be the hero, right? So she is out there fighting the fight with the burden of the failed Icon experiment. She had this idea of changing the world and it didn't work. And so what she learned is you can only change the world day by day, incrementally, on a scale that if you thought about it would seem like nothing to you. It would seem infinitesimal, right? But she hopes to God that she will have a cumulative effect on the world.
Yeah, not a message or anything that has any connection with the real world or anything. He said sarcastically. Sorry,
nothing has anything to do with the real world. Nothing that we write has anything to do with us trying to figure out our positioning in the real world. When in fact, everything we write is us trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Is there anything you can tell us about the next 3 issues? Anything you want to tease?
Yes. Again, Rocket is out there being a hero, and there's this secret society of superheroes called the Shadow Cabinet who have been manipulating things behind the scenes for some time, and they try to recruit her. And the story is about the head of that secret society. His name is Dharma, and he has the ability to see past and present and future. He has time view, and he tells Rocket something, and it changes things. It changes things for her profoundly. And it's about that. It's about when you learn a thing that reframes everything, how do you continue to go forward? And this is going to be a reintroduction of heroes. So when you talk about Milestone, the most known hero is Static. One of the automatic questions is, where's Static? You will find out where Static is in issue 2. And he's not the same kid that you last saw. And there are reasons for this, right? But ultimately, I would say the macro theme is inheritance, right? It's we all get a moment or an opportunity to have agency in this world. What do we do with it? What do you do with it if you decide to take on the role? What do you do with it if it just slams into you out of nowhere? And so Rocket is on a very particular journey, and she learned something which is frightening for a 17-year-old to learn. And Angela Alva is on a journey, and Angela Alva has been alive for 6 decades. And she has a very particular perception of the world and what justice is. And so this is a story about the people who dare to change things and the people behind the scenes who are changing things as well.
All right. Issue 1 comes out next Wednesday, November 20th. You have a signing tour of sorts.
Yeah, the first 2 stops are going to be in my hometown of Brooklyn, New York.
Mm-hmm.
There's plans for Philadelphia. There's talk about North Carolina.
Ooh.
So artist Darryl Banks is going to be doing a signing. So the Shadow Cabinet signing tour is not just about me. It's about any members of Team Shadow Cabinet doing a tour, because this is a celebration of the return of Milestone. This is a celebration of comics. And it's a reminder that even though this is all work, and even though you may think the world is burning at any given time, there's still fun to be had.
Yeah, it's comics. Comics are fun. More often than not.
They are a storytelling medium unlike any other. And hopefully they are our conversations with ourselves to answer some questions, the same way prose is, the same way cinema is. It's a narrative form, and it's truly unlike any other. Comics can do things that no other medium can do.
Absolutely. Where can people follow you best to find out about the Illidge tour?
All right. I always say these days it's where you can't find me. That's the harder question.
Hey, great.
On Facebook, I'm Joe Illidge. So that's Ilidge. On Blue Sky,
yeah,
I am Joseph P. Illidge. So I'm seeing more people on Blue Sky. That's great. On Twitter, which I am still at for the time being, I am also Joseph P. Illidge. On LinkedIn, I'm Joseph Philip Illidge. And on Instagram, I am Illmaster1, because I had a moment where I said, okay, I want to shake it up, but I still want people to know it's me. So that is where I can be found. And if you go to any of those pages, Shadow Cabinet is basically what I've been talking about for the most part. That and another project which you and I can talk about on a future episode. But so please check in, and hope you'll come along with us for the ride, and would love to hear what you think about it on the socials.
Yeah, man, it's a good book. I'm a little bummed because now that I read it for this, it's like I have to wait an extra week until issue 2.
Oh,
right? Because everyone else they'll get their things in a week, but I'm already on board for issue 2, and it's an extra 7 days for you, and I'm like, oh, but you know what?
Sorry.
It's a heavy burden that we podcasters have to bear, but you know what?
True. And we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Joe. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always good to be on Robots.
Thank you for listening. Systems disengaged.